I'm Caroline Gooden. I'm here with Project Scope and delighted to have you all with us today. I'm going to share my screen and just kind of go through procedures for our time together today. You see my screen okay? Looking good? Okay. So again, we welcome you to this session today. It is, we're honored to have the Honorable Judge Kevin Mullins from Letcher County, who is talking with us today about court processes for families. We think you'll find this to be a fascinating day. So just to tell you who some of us are behind the scenes on Scope, I'm the director of the project. Juliet Souders is here. She is our facilitator coordinator. Brandon Canada is here. He does all things technology. Michaela Roark is our evaluation people. Lots of you on the call today are our small group facilitators. We appreciate each and every one of you. We have lots of staff from the Administrative Office of the Courts. We'll introduce a couple of those in a bit, and we are grateful to have each of you here, our participants for this day. So just to show you what's coming up, again, we have Letcher District Judge Kevin Mullins with us today. In 2 weeks, we'll have Dr. Ginny Sprang talking about provider strategies for resilience. And our last session will be May 19th with Dr. David Lohr, who will talk to us about understanding recovery for persons with addiction. So again, all of our topics this series have been related to addressing the mental health needs of those of us who serve persons with addiction.
So a brief summary from our last session on April 7th. We had Kristen Dahl come to speak to us about self-compassion for providers. And that was a really wonderful session. We talked a lot about mindfulness and cultivating self-compassion. So an example of that is self-kindness versus self-judgment. We talked about some really great grounding techniques for moments of stress and for staying present. And that included the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique and also square breathing. Also, we just touched on how people in helping roles are often experiencing secondary trauma on a regular basis. So we all just need to check in with ourselves and take care of our own needs as well as the needs of those that we are serving. A question that we asked was, how do you support others experiencing secondary trauma? We had some wonderful discussion in our small groups. So some examples of this were being a good listener, checking in on the people around you, and expressing gratitude for the people around you as well. There was a case presentation about Alex, who was a peer support mentor. And some of the strategies that we brought up in our small group discussions included using grounding techniques when overwhelmed, asking for help, and expressing their feelings to a trusted friend or colleague, meeting with their supervisor to check in about workload and see if there was a better way to balance or reduce some of the responsibilities, and also seeking out mental health support groups or individual therapy, perhaps through the employee assistance program that was mentioned. Also, just communicating with family, friends, or childcare providers to have some time for self-care outside of work. A big thank you to our small group facilitators who are here if we need them for our small group discussions. That includes Caroline Gooden and Mark Pratt, Juliet Souders and Linda Arnold, Tanya Torp and Sasha Braven, Karen Cottingem and Mahala Saylor, Dr. Myra Beth Bundy and Bridget Talley, Melissa Hampton and Canyon Hardesty, Brittany Barber and Kayla Harmon. So thank you all for being here, even if we end up just having a large group discussion.
So just to briefly look at how the schedule will go for this afternoon's session. We'll take about 10 minutes as we are now just to talk about procedures for this session. At about 4:10, 10 after the hour, Judge Mullins will share with us lots of interesting information about the court processes that he's been involved with. And then at the end of the session, by about 15 minutes till the end of the session, we'll talk as a large group. We'll have a chance to ask Judge Mullins questions, make comments. And I will add here that he has a lot of rich information and he has offered to stay past the hour and a half if anyone has additional questions. So I'll let you know that that is an option as well. If you need to jump off right on time, we understand that as well. Just a couple of procedure reminders. Please keep your cameras on and your microphones muted. There are going to be sensitive topics introduced today, and we encourage you to take care of yourself as we always do during this session. If you need to turn away, if you need to take a break, if you need to do some breathing, we encourage you to do that. Please do continue to protect the confidentiality of all the clients who we serve. A reminder that addiction is a disease, not a choice. And as Judge Mullins talks, we'll be monitoring the chat. And once he's through with his presentation, we'll then raise the questions and comments that you have after he presents. We do use person first language here, acknowledging that we are all people first with conditions secondarily. We are recording this session and it is closed caption. You can turn on the transcription if you need it. Please feel free to make comments in the chat at any time, and we will bring those up after he's done speaking. We do respect all viewpoints with our session here. All viewpoints are valid. And if you have case studies that relate to the topics coming up in May, please share them with Juliet and myself. We would love to have you bring a case study to either one of our sessions in May.
And as always, I just want to remind everybody about our Scope Echo resource page. There you can find good information such as the judge's slideshow from today's presentation, as well as past presentations. And we also have information regarding CEUs that you might find useful. If you have any questions about accessing any of that or run into any tech issues here today, just reach out to me. Thanks for being here.
So I am now have the honor to introduce Dolores Smith, who will then introduce the judge for us. Dolores has been really active with us this series, helping us organize this series for you all, and has really been instrumental in arranging for having Judge Mullins speak with us today. Dolores has worked for the Administrative Office of the Courts, the Department of Family and Juvenile Services since 1996. Her first position was as a field coordinator in Western Kentucky, working with the Citizen Foster Care Review Board. Many of you here are from that agency as well. She is now the statewide operations supervisor for the Citizens Foster Care Review Board. And Dolores, we are delighted to have you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you. I mean, we really have appreciated this opportunity to collaborate with you all for these trainings being available for the Citizen Foster Care Review Board volunteers. So thank you very much to Carolyn, Juliet, and Brandon. It's been a pleasure working with you all. And I'm very honored to be able to introduce Judge Mullins, the Honorable Kevin Mullins, Letcher County District Court Judge. He is the speaker for our presentation. And I'm just going to tell you, Judge Mullins put his heart and soul in creating this presentation for this today. So I think you will see the passion that he feels for his work. He became judge in 2009, and right after that, he began working with local community resources to develop the concept of peer support in the courtroom, where folks in drug addiction recovery would be stationed in the courtroom to talk to those in the courtroom interested in recovery. During his tenure as judge, 708 persons he has helped get into inpatient treatment. Currently, Judge Mullins is one of 12 judges in Kentucky serving in the responsive effort to support treatment in opioid recovery efforts known as Restore. He is part of the leadership team working to transform our court system into a recovery-oriented system of care. So without further ado, I would like to present Judge Mullins.
Good afternoon. I would first like to say it is an honor to be asked to speak with you here today. I'm attempting to share my screen, but it's saying that the host has disabled me.
We'll work on that.
Okay. And I'll go through some of my introduction and hopefully we'll be ready for the slides. I had just got back last night from the RX Summit in Atlanta, and I'd attended 2 or 3 presentations that talked about the concept of meeting people where they are at. And with that, it's obviously a leadership frame of mind, but it's also, I take it more so a literal frame of mind. And when we're literally looking at meeting people who are suffering from a substance use disorder or behavioral health issue, I can tell you where those people are at. And those people are at the courthouse. And what they are called there is a justice-involved participant. And I'll go through that a little bit more. Justice-involved participant originally grew out of a nice way to refer to a criminal defendant. Since that time, the concept of a justice-involved participant has been expanding and now encompasses anyone who is involved with the court system. We see these cases primarily could be a victim of domestic violence or abuse or the perpetrator of domestic violence or abuse. We see these individuals in Casey's Law matters. We'll go over, if you're not familiar with what a Casey's Law is later. We also see them as social services participants or people who's involved in what's referred to as a dependency, neglect, or abuse case. And we'll probably spend more time on that last justice-involved participant than the others. Okay.
Is it ready for him to share, Brandon? Can he go ahead?
You should be able to share now, Judge.
Okay, let me try. And I always tell people, I am so computer literate that I need a bag phone. So a lot of this might be operator error. Okay.
Okay.
And I just think I need to go to the beginning. Let's see.
No worries.
And let's see, I'm having difficult, moving back to the, I do apologize. We had all this set up before and I think I, all right. So I guess kind of now to start back again, in looking at any problem and trying to find any potential solution, I always look at things through the scope of where we are, how did we get there, and where we're going. And I'm going to use those 3 criteria kind of as a framework or outline to my presentation today. I'm going to start off with where we're at as a community in the Commonwealth of Kentucky as it pertains to substance abuse disorders or problems with drug addiction. The court system is pretty unique at monitoring these problems because we can actually look at case types fairly easily. And the graph you're showing you is from the Administrative Office of the Court and covers the period of 1996 to 2019. And the significance of this graph is the red line, which represents methamphetamine cases. And it's clearly easy to track methamphetamine cases through the court system. There's 4 types of methamphetamine cases: possession of methamphetamine, trafficking in methamphetamine, possession of meth precursors, and manufacturing meth. Thank goodness over the years since the enactment of the Combat Methamphetamine Act of 2005, the last 2, the manufacturing of methamphetamine and the methamphetamine precursors, are fairly non-existent. Unfortunately, that meant that the production just got moved overseas, primarily to Mexico, but other countries as well, wherein most of this substance is actually imported into the United States. But as you look at the chart, the significance of that is methamphetamine clearly dwarfs or dominates the current cases that we're seeing in court. It also can be clearly validated by, in Kentucky, anytime there is a substance seized, which has to be identified before it can go to court, it is sent to one of 6 Kentucky State Police crime labs. It's located throughout the state. And these are their findings based upon what they're seeing. And as you can see, there's obviously each year from 17, there's been a substantial uptake in the amount of methamphetamine submissions to the Kentucky State Crime Lab. And in fact, in 2019, as I like to picture it in my mind, if you took a basketball court and divided it at half court, put the meth samples on one side and everything else on the other side, it would be fairly equivalent. These numbers look a little better in the following year, but with a caveat, the KSB changed the way they counted substances submitted. So there's really been no great improvement. Methamphetamine still is the largest illegal substance that's found and being used in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The problem with methamphetamine is not a rural versus city, one area of the state versus the other. These graphs show methamphetamine in blue, and they're from each potential KSP area. In looking at the state, the only area wherein fentanyl or heroin even comes close to methamphetamine would be in the Fayette County area, Fayette Franklin County, which is where KSP Post 12. It is the only county that is, or area that is even close in the amount of substances seized. Now, there's obviously been a lot of attention, and rightfully so, on heroin and fentanyl, because even the world's best provider cannot treat someone who is dead. So there's a lot of attention on that. Numbers wise, it's nowhere near as prevalent as methamphetamine, but at the same token, much more damaging. The numbers that we're seeing in Kentucky is not unique. If you look at this on a national level, the numbers that are received throughout the nation, the National Forensic Laboratory Information System monitors every crime lab in the nation. All the reports are generated to them and required to by law. As you notice, methamphetamine clearly leads the way. For years, it was marijuana. I make an assumption with the number of states that have legalized marijuana that these numbers are down. When we look at, and I first talked to you about a justice-involved participant as it historically grew out of what we refer to as a criminal defendant, who's someone under charges, could be possession, trafficking, etc. Also could be someone charged with a theft to support their habit, domestic violence, etc. Probably the best numbers to look at are actually from the jails or prisons themselves. That way, no one can say that these numbers are biased by either a conservative or a liberal organization. It's actually kind of going to the source. And if you look at the source for the prisons, the U.S. Department of Justice keeps track of this. According to their findings, about 63% of those in the prison system suffer from some type of substance use disorder. That's obviously substantially higher than the 5% of the general population. Now, in order to make these determinations, and I just put this slide there, they go by the DSM-4 criteria, obviously recognizable criteria for diagnosing substance use disorder. When we look at that number back on a state level, these numbers come from the Kentucky Department of Corrections as people leave treatment and go into a substance abuse program as part of a probation or parole type scenario. You see the amount of people who are leaving prison who are using methamphetamines in the 60%, along with the other litany of drugs. When I talk obviously about people using drugs, we're getting into the situation now of what I call polysubstance use, which means that people are using multiple different drugs. You may have someone who's on methamphetamine, who's also taking fentanyl or heroin to get some relief from the methamphetamine. I've been up 3 or 4 days. I'm going to take some heroin or fentanyl to get some relief, get some sleep. It's, I guess the easiest analogy is kind of a very bad analogy, but it's kind of the coffee in the morning, wine at night type approach to drug use. Kind of where we're at as far as the Commonwealth goes, and I guess the first part that I told you, I think you got to first know where you're at before you figure out where you're going. In Kentucky, we have historically tried to incarcerate our way out of this problem. And in doing so, we've created some very bad effects that still last here today. And we'll try to, at the end, maybe talk about some of the changes that we're doing. But we originally tried to incarcerate our way out of this problem. We enacted lightning fast legislation. We enhanced penalties, and I think all of it was kind of in the mindset of fear. At the same token, we were doing all this following, or at the same time of the first wave of the opioid epidemic, following the OxyContin deaths. There wasn't nearly the information out there about how to handle addiction, how to treat addiction, what to do. And I can honestly say we did all the wrong things. As part of this, sitting here counting, Kentucky has now become the 7th largest incarcerator of its people per population in the world. Okay, so that's obviously nothing for us to quite be proud of, especially when you look at the list that our incarceration rates double a lot of dictatorships and a lot of countries that we've historically looked down upon for violating human rights, Rwanda, Cuba, the list goes on. And the chart you're looking at does not carve out male females, because that's the next one. So when we're dealing with females, Kentucky has become the 3rd largest incarcerator of females per population in the world. And when I say became, that meant because for years we were the 2nd. Oklahoma has historically beaten everyone out, and very tragically do not offer the same programs in prison for the females that they do to the males in anywhere equivalent. So we're the 3rd largest incarcerator of females in the world. We put our own people in jail more so than everyone, with the exception of Oklahoma and Wyoming. And just to kind of make this make sense for you, this is just kind of a top of an ad, or not an ad, an article, I believe it was the New York Times, pertaining to El Salvador, to give you an idea of how enlightened El Salvador is. These are pictures of 2 ladies who were in a state-run hospital. The reason why they're in a state-run hospital is in El Salvador, if a woman develops any kind of problems during pregnancy, she immediately goes and enrolls herself into a state-run hospital. Well, I mean, besides the normal reason, the other reason is El Salvador has a history of incarcerating women who have stillbirths without any evidence that this person used drugs, done any kind of act to intentionally harm the child, anything. In fact, I think this article was written on a lady who worked as a waitress. They had no evidence that she had done anything to contribute to her stillbirth, and she was given a 30-year prison sentence. When you look at Kentucky and you think about El Salvador, if it makes you feel good that we incarcerate our female population at a rate twice more than El Salvador, you might not want to watch the rest of this presentation. We've talked a lot about meth, and meth is kind of new on the scene with us. We've had the history with opioids, and we're kind of much more familiar. If you have any questions about methamphetamine, its history, meth has been here since the late 1800s, actually developed prior to aspirin, marketed prior to aspirin. Its pharmacology and treatment. This is an excellent book. Only problem with the book, it was written in 2009. And the only mistake that the book makes is how prevalent meth would become. Other than that, it is excellent source if you have on any questions. In the book, kind of one of the most common errors that people make is that the use of methamphetamine creates a greater amount of overall or general public violence. And there's been no study to show that that's true. However, and what's appearing here on your slides now are some studies that show there is a huge correlation between methamphetamine use and an increase in domestic violence. Now, the next, what I have here is a video. If there is anyone who is attending who is currently in recovery, there will be scenes of drug use. And if that is a triggering event for you, this might be the next 3 or 4 minutes to turn away. Also, there is an occurrence on here of domestic violence. So if you're a victim of domestic violence, I just want to let you aware of that. There's also some stimulation or simulation, I guess would be the correct word, of suicide. So with that disclaimer, I'm going to go ahead. This does not have audio. This was actually recorded off the home surveillance system that you're seeing here, this big monitor with the different rooms on it. Obviously, one of the parts of methamphetamine is the paranoia that it creates. And I guess also the paranoia is created when you also deal methamphetamine. So I'll start the video and kind of do the color commentary as we're going through this. Okay, so this video was obtained from the Arizona HIDTA Task Force. And if you're not familiar with the Arizona HIDTA Task Force, look them up online. They have a ton of public information, great tools, great resources that they want people to use to educate their public about methamphetamine. Arizona and California have been dealing with the methamphetamine crisis very similar to our dealing with the opioid crisis. They have dealt with it the longest. In the video, you can see the lady who's pulled out what I would consider a fairly substantial bag of methamphetamine to begin using or obtaining her fix. This video is interesting because we've always wanted to know what goes on inside a home that someone who's using meth. However, it would be obviously extremely unethical to monitor a home where someone's using meth and has children in it. So there's no studies on the fact. This is all candid video that was retrieved from their surveillance system. In this case, the same lady using drugs, you can see, gets in a domestic confrontation with her paramour. Again, there's substantial correlation between methamphetamine use and domestic violence. In the video, the lady's young son tries to come offer her some assistance. Now that her daughter's here with a toy gun, you can watch her attempt to shoot the perpetrator. She makes some kind of vague gestures, but that gesture there is unmistakable, that she puts the toy gun up to her head. One of the unknown facts about methamphetamine, people who intravenously use methamphetamine have an 80% higher likelihood to attempt or commit suicide greater than any other drug on planet Earth. That's from the Vancouver Injection Drug Study and the Columbia University study out of New York. This case is where some local marijuana dealers come over to confront the meth dealers because they've heard they're selling to kids and get into an altercation. The same gentleman who was on top of the ladies before, the lady comes out with a pistol. She shoots him either 1 or 2 times. Following this occurrence, the gentleman she shoots is pronounced dead. You see them placing what I'm going to call a body bag. It might not be the correct terminology, over him. After this incident took place, the 2 children that you saw were placed in foster care. While in school one day, the same 2 adults that you see here hugged up together came to school, abducted the children, and then led the Arizona police on a 100-mile police pursuit. In Kentucky, anytime there is an act of domestic violence, and especially if there's an act involving children, law enforcement is required to fill out what's called a JC3 form, and that's I just showed you as a way of example. For that, a JC3 form is an attempt to get down the basic information as to what took place, who was there, what was caused, what was done. Were there children? It's a form that's actually provided, I believe, by the Justice Cabinet. And as part of this form, if there's children involved by law, it's required to be referred or sent to the Cabinet for Families and Children for further investigation. And it's one of the main, but not the main area how cases get started for a dependency, neglect, and abuse and social service case. There's also other ways that a case can be started with the cabinet and then come to court. There is a reporting number that you can call. There's also a website that you can fill out. There are certain people involved in the court system, just like myself, as well as law enforcement who are under a duty and obligation to report any type of suspected dependency, neglect, or abuse to the cabinet. Doesn't mean they have to accept it. It also, once the case goes to the cabinet, once for their review, they have an opportunity to substantiate it, which I guess an easy way to look at it, is there any merit or is it unsubstantiated, meaning there's no merit? If the cabinet finds merit, then they will refer it to the court system. And I'm going to get into a little bit about the numbers because I like numbers. I think you might can tell as to the prevalence of substance use disorders in cases that will ultimately come to court. Unfortunately, one of the worst sources for that is the Child Fatality and Near Fatality Review that's required to be conducted by law each year. Their findings from the last report that they compiled was that 49% of all cases that they had the misfortune of having to investigate had some portion that was caused by substance abuse by a parent or caregiver. So in that particular number, it's 49%. When we look at cabinet cases in general, we find there's a severe amount or significant amount of substance abuse. Roughly 63% of the cases that involve cabinet filings, and I think that's what this is, filing, has some type of direct, indirect, or factor of substance abuse in the home. So again, we're back to the similar to the criminal number of 60, the fatal and non-fatal, in essence, 50%. When we start looking at these, we notice that in foster care statewide, there's 8,888 children who are currently in Kentucky's foster care system. The average stay in foster care is 25 months, so it's 2 years and a month. The average cost to the state per foster child, $57,144.32. So when you multiply the number of children in treatment, the 8,888 times the 57,000, we've done this prior to the presentation. Unbelievable, that comes up to $508 million. So we're talking roughly $500 million that is being spent at the very least upon children being placed in foster care. When we look at these numbers on a national level, we realize that we're about the same as the nation, which is about 60% of all children placed in foster care in the nation are placed there due as a result or primarily based upon a parent or caregiver suffering from some form of substance use disorder. And I'm going to kind of generically talk about substance use disorders primarily throughout this, with the recognition that everybody realizes the huge correlation between other behavioral health issues that go along and is part of the substance abuse. Because it's, I guess really what I'm saying, it's all a very similar topic. In reference to if a case is substantiated, depending on where you're located in the state, in Letcher County, we do not have a family court. And with that, absent a family court, all dependency, neglect, and abuse cases come through the district court. Again, if you do have a family court where you live, then it would go to a family court judge whose job is primarily just to deal with these different type of family court issues. Okay. When we deal with the definition of an abused or neglected child as it pertains to my presentation today, I won't go over all of the definitions, but I will go over the primary one, which is engaging a pattern of conduct, rendering the parent incapable of caring for the child, which may include incapacity due to alcohol or drugs. What that means in my interpretation is it's not simply enough that a parent uses drugs, but they have to use them to such an extent that it makes it harmful or detrimental for them to raise a child. It's not safe, might be an easier way to put that. In looking at this, once the cabinet files their initial paperwork to come to court for an emergency custody order, depending on if I remove the child, if I do, place the child in a relative caregiving facility, if there is an appropriate relative, that is the ideal means to place the child with a relative, with the thinking that that will be the least harmful on the child. Often there is not a suitable relative, and the child has to be placed in foster care. If they are removed from the home, we're required to have a hearing within 72 hours. If they are not removed from the home, meaning that there are other safety measures that can be put in place that will guarantee that the child will not be hurt, we can do that within 10 days. We come to court on a temporary removal hearing, kind of the dates that I've told you before. At that hearing, pretty much everything comes in. It doesn't have to be proved like it normally would be at a trial. There can be grounds to have hearsay evidence come in. At that hearing, the standard that we use is a preponderance of evidence. As I like to tell people, that's one of the least legal standards that's known to exist. It is nowhere in the same area code as the beyond a reasonable doubt statute or standard that you may have heard of, because that standard is reserved entirely for criminal cases. The preponderance of the evidence is slightly above a probable cause finding to issue a search warrant, but it is a fairly low standard of proof. In order to qualify for several federal mandates, the cabinet must show that they've made some reasonable efforts to prevent removal. Are there safeguards that can be enacted or put into place? Removal should be the last option, but sometimes the severity of what you're dealing with, there is no other option. After the temporary removal order is entered, we have 45 days in which to conduct an adjudication hearing. An adjudication hearing is probably the most similar thing to a trial in reference to these matters before the court, none of which pertain to a jury. This is all a decision for either the district or family court judge to make a determination. At that hearing, the civil rules do apply, so you have to have witnesses in person, or I guess nowadays via Zoom. The court has to make a determination, is the child dependent, neglected, or abused? And it is on the Commonwealth to prove that burden. Again, it's the court, not the jury, has the right to confront and cross-examine witnesses. We routinely appoint the parents and the children or child an attorney to represent their interests. If the allegations can be proven, we then proceed to a following hearing, which is called a disposition hearing. A disposition hearing is basically a case plan. What is our plan? What is our goal? What services have been offered to the family? Is the family compliant with those services? Obviously, when you're dealing with a substantial number of children who are being removed based upon drug activity in the home, what we've started doing and done for a while now is putting part of our case plans is where the social services will recommend that the parents receive some type of inpatient or outpatient treatment on a case-by-case basis, depending on the drug abuse, the severity, the resources available. This has been a big departure from what was historically done in these type of cases, because once again, what we historically done was entirely wrong. We would have people in court who suffered from a substance use disorder. We would set things up like drug screens. And with drug screens, we obviously had problems with people affording the transportation, affording the cost of the drug screens. The number and types of drug screens would be set by the judge, who is not a provider and maybe does not know what is in his patient's or this person's best interest. And we would do some very, or I should say some would do some very unusual things. You have to pass so many drug screens before you get to visit with your children. you can't get your children back before you can provide us X number of clean drug screens, all at the same token, recognizing these people had a problem, but giving them no treatment options to get to the solution, which we wanted was negative drug screens, but we gave them no guidance. So now there's a big movement, even in the family courts, in every court, to refer people to treatment and have the providers make the decision, okay, when a person needs test, when that testing needs labbed, when does that testing need to be quantified as to the amount of substance. So there's a big push now to refer people out to treatment. We found it makes the social worker's job a lot easier because, you know, they refer someone to treatment, they obtain an executed release, they're able to follow, is this person compliant with the program? Are they still in attendance? Have they been kicked out? And it seems to create much better outcomes for the families and even for the participants in court. So that's kind of one of the things that we've been doing throughout these cases, because at some point in time, if a family is compliant, the county attorney can move to dismiss, or when I say county attorney, it's the Commonwealth, can move to dismiss the case on the condition the person continues to keep up with the services that they've been doing and they've proven that they're doing. The worst outcome for the court is that we reach a point in time where we have to have a permanent custody hearing. And if it's a child under 3, it's 6 months. And if it's over 3, it's a year. And at that court date and time, if a person's not been cooperative with treatment, working with their social worker, and it could be a litany of other reasons, then we're set for a permanent custody hearing. Following the permanent custody hearing, the court makes a finding, it is much more difficult for a person to legally obtain or get return of their child. If the child is in foster care, we must conduct a permanency review hearings each and every 12 months after that, trying to figure out what the goal of the child should be: to be returned home, be placed in adoption, or be placed in a permanent custodian. The court system's mandate, even from the inception, is to try to return the children and to reunite the families. Sometimes that is impossible because someone will choose their addiction over their children, but that might have been a harsh way of saying it. Maybe sometimes their addiction was so severe they could not, or they just weren't at the right time to make that decision. Kind of one of the things that we started doing earlier, and I'll play the video to give you a little rest for me. This is a video that was made at the end of right around Christmas time of 2018. It kind of, I hope, puts for you together some of the things I've been talking about, trying to refer people to treatment, whether irregardless of the type of case, and kind of some of the changes that hopefully the court system is going towards.
I mean, you don't wake up one morning and think, aha, I want to be a drug addict. So, I mean, you do it once and you're high. Well, I'm going to do it again. It felt pretty good. And then before you know it, you have to have it. I had a perfect childhood. My dad was a coal miner. My mom stayed at home with us. He worked hard for us. I didn't go without. Anything.
It's completely across the board. I mean, it does not matter economic status. It doesn't matter. You know, we have people just like Allison here today, her family, I've known her and her family her whole life. And they're just good people. But, you know, I guess bad things can happen to good people.
It started out, you know, partying on the weekends, and that's the only thing that I did. And then it led to something deeper. I started doing meth that turned my world upside down. I was no longer me. I couldn't function. couldn't do daily things. I wanted to stay home. I didn't want my mom to see me. I didn't want people in public to see me.
One of the big problems that you see with people who are struggling or suffering from a drug addiction is a lot of times their whole goal in life is wondering where they're going to receive their next score, next pill, next unit, and they let all their health deteriorate.
And I couldn't stop. I knew I was pregnant and I couldn't stop using. And that's a horrible feeling. I mean, and knowing that you're carrying a child and that you're using these poisonous chemicals, you're putting them in your body, it just doesn't make any sense.
As I remember, she was arrested on June 28th, booked in the jail, and I had set her a bond that she could not post. And at some point thereafter, I asked her if she was interested in treatment, and I think she indicated that she was.
When I was arrested on June 28th of last year, that set in motion everything that's happened and where I am now. And whenever he offered me rehab, of course, I was grateful.
The next process after she was booked and expressed an interest in seeking treatment, we sent her out to Mountain Comp, and I think it was on July the 2nd, and she was sent by the jail. They done a full physical exam. During that exam, they discovered that she was pregnant. She met all the requirements and criteria for someone to seek and be admitted into an inpatient drug rehab. And on July 12th, she was actually admitted into Karen's Place maternity ward.
When they came and got me, I cried. It kind of felt like I was leaving my kids, even though I was in jail and I didn't get to see them. You know, I was going somewhere strange, a different county. Everything was just, the fog hadn't lifted from all the drug abuse. I was still withdrawing really bad. I didn't know if I was going to make it. You know, I was in such bad shape. I was just trying to get through the day, just trying to get through the next day. Most of the time it wasn't even day by day, it was just second by second, if I could just make it.
If you send someone to an inpatient maternity ward, obviously, if they're good, you don't want them to have a quick turnover rate. You want them to get someone in, keep them until the child is born.
July 12th, I went into treatment. It was the best thing that's ever happened to me. I wanted to change, and I did change, but it was because of those people that kept encouraging me and loving me and, you know, helping me get through that tough time. I was being educated on how to be normal, how not to be an addict. I was a pro at being an addict. I didn't know anything about being sober. The long-term treatment, that was key because that gave me the opportunity to create new habits. You need a lifestyle change. You can't keep doing the same things that you were doing. Those women that work in that rehab facility, they are special. I mean, they're like God sent because you have to be a special person to be able to love somebody that I was. They loved me back to life. I gave birth November 20th to Kaylee, Danny Lynn Rose, and when I held her in my arms, it was the best feeling. It was amazing because I knew that it was just a blessing straight from God, that she was perfect. She didn't have any withdrawals. She didn't have any trouble, and everything was perfect. Her eyes, her ears, her fingers. I was just beyond blessed. Seeing my mom and my kids was the greatest moment. They didn't know I was coming home, and I can't explain how happy I was to have their arms around me. I had waited so long and missed them so much that was the best moment. Judge Mullins has done so much for this community. He's done so much for me. He's opened doors that I never even dreamed of. It was a great feeling to see him and to let him hold the baby, to see something that he had started. This was a product of something that he had set into place. If he had just threw me in jail, I would have been chained to a bed, giving birth to my baby and giving my baby up. But he gave me the opportunity to better myself, to find recovery and to get help, to be the person that God has intended for me to be.
If we keep doing the same old thing that we've done in the past, I don't know how that we can expect anything to change. And we have to start expecting miracles.
If you can change just one, if you can give one kid a mommy, one son of daddy to take them fishing? Isn't it all worth it?
We have to get ourselves in the mindset of good things can happen, but we just have to start taking those steps for those good things to happen. And Allison, in the birth of her child, is the classic example of good things can happen if you try.
This journey has been difficult and I've had a lot of struggles, but Karen's place saved my life. And here I am, almost a year clean, my baby's 6 months old, living the best life.
All right. So with that, I guess I'd gotten out of my own order that I'd told you that where we are, how do we get there and where we're going. I think most of us realize how we got where we're at with our drug addiction problem. But one thing before we move on, I want to touch base on. One of the things I think that makes Kentucky very important over any other state is that we've been dealing with this problem longer than anywhere else in the nation when it pertains to opioids. You know, all the major literature indicates that the first wave of the opioid epidemic took place in Eastern Kentucky, Southwest Virginia, and West Virginia. In all of that first wave was following the deaths that resulted from the release of OxyContin in 1996. However, the problem that all major literature gets wrong is the fact that we in these areas had major problems with opioids prior to the release of OxyContin in 1996. In fact, it's just came out here recently that Purdue Pharma's decision to first roll out OxyContin in the test markets of Eastern Kentucky, Southwest Virginia, and West Virginia was due to the fact that even prior to its release, the prescription opioid rates in those areas were 500% the rest of the nation. So we've dealt with this problem a long time. And I do think that that does help us. And we've talked about some of the mistakes that we've had. And I want to move on kind of to where we're going. As you noticed, Allison talked about her going into treatment on July 12th of 2018. After that, shortly after that, one of the great moves that Kentucky did, and something I am very proud of, is the Women's with Dignity Act, which basically requires that if a woman's incarcerated in jail and there's reason to believe that she is subject or is suffering from a substance use disorder, that you can actually order that person into treatment until such time as she has the child, which again, that's a great departure of having to send the lady and her child to Pee Wee Valley, which is the women's facility, to give birth to that child. So it's a great departure that has happened. And in fact, Kentucky has now enacted the Women's with Dignity Act 2. We were the first to enact one, and we were first to move on to the second, which is just more rights for pregnant incarcerated women. Also in 2018, I want to share with you a story of something that took place on August 8th, 2018. We were in court on what's called a Casey's Law matter. And a Casey's Law matter, if you're not familiar with it, is a proceeding that is initiated by a family member asking the court to see whether or not it is beneficial that their loved one be, in extent, ordered to treatment, okay? And that decision is made based upon a follow-up by having the person evaluated by a doctor and a behavioral health expert to see if this person, number one, does suffer from a substance use disorder, and number two, is it likely that they could benefit from some form of treatment. In 18, the number of cases that we saw like that were nowhere near what we're seeing now. It's became much more popular, and maybe the correct term was much more needed. I'm not sure. But in 2018, we didn't have as many Casey's Law matters. And I was given the opportunity to spend more time with people who came in my court on these matters than I do now, which is unfortunate. And in this hearing, I was dealing with a lady, and she was represented by an attorney. And this lady's story was, at some point in time, she was dating the local meth dealer in a very remote part of the county and became severely addicted to methamphetamine. He had gotten arrested for meth trafficking and was in jail. When he went to jail, her source for the methamphetamine was gone, and her ability to obtain methamphetamine was gone. She became addicted to shooting herself up intravenously with Gatorade. And again, I just said Gatorade. And for those of you who might not be in the field, on the street, they refer to it as addicted to the stick. And that's very slang for what they mean is that she's addicted to the process, the putting the tourniquet on her arm, the drawing and the plunging of blood. And also by giving herself the Gatorade, it kind of created a placebo effect for her that she was obtaining some type of intoxication. In these cases, laws matters, absent very extreme grounds, I prefer not to mandate or force treatment on people. I don't find it's beneficial to do so. In my mind, it's much more beneficial to educate someone as to their addiction and what treatment can do for them and allow them to feel like they're having some part in their own destiny. Okay, I'm not sure that's proven out scientifically, but that is my opinion. So I was dealing with a lady who was addicted to shooting herself up Gatorade. And I'd spoken to her about 45 minutes as to why I thought it could help her and why I thought she needed treatment. And it was one of those situations that we kind of took 2 steps forward, and then the next few minutes would take 3 steps back. And after 45 minutes, I really hadn't gotten anywhere. So it was a beautiful day. And I said, well, let's go outside. You know, it's a pretty day. So me and her attorney walked outside. And it was kind of at that moment, I guess, I don't know if you call it dumb luck or just luck, happened. As we were standing there, there were 3 ladies from an inpatient rehabilitation center who I recognized I didn't know who they were, but I saw their name badges that they were wearing. And they were actually going to jail to transport a lady from jail to treatment. And I motioned for them to come over. And I said, hey, are you guys here from an inpatient treatment? Yes, all 3 of them were. And I'm like, are you guys in recovery? And they're like, yes, all 3 of us are. And they sat down and talked to her. And in 5 minutes, had her convinced into going to treatment. I'm like, man, I've just spent 45 minutes and gotten nowhere. These ladies were able to convince her into going to treatment probably on a number of grounds. The first, in my opinion, was these people had walked in her same shoes. There was no judgment, and I'm not judgmental, but they had no judgment, but they immediately with her had a much higher level of trust with her. And after I witnessed this go down, I really didn't know what it was called, but I got immediately on the phone to the inpatient provider or one of the main ones that we're using. And I went through the story with him. I'm like, I've just seen this. I'm like, you have to send me somebody that's walked in these people's same shoes. So with that, he sent me this gentleman. And Michael was on the video that you just saw. At the time of this photo, I think Michael had been convicted of about 28 different crimes, all of which were primarily drug involved or drug related. But he had went to prison. He had subsequently went through one of the programs that was offered by prison and had obtained sobriety and was at the time working for the rehab company. So when he came here, one of the things that he wanted to do was to go out to schools and do some prevention talks to children. This is at one of the local elementary school gyms. So he went out and did that, but primarily his job was to be stationed here at the courthouse. So anytime we had a case, irregardless of what type case, if we had someone who asked questions about just very elementary questions. What is rehab? What's it like? How do I get there? Who pays for it? Etc. We had him available to go out and meet and talk with his people. And as he began talking to these people, and we started to get more and more people into treatment, there were a lot of other people came on board. Our jailer, who's pictured here to the far right, is waiting on 3 people who've just gotten released from jail to go to treatment. The jailer is my friend, but I always give him a big shout out. The best jailer in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. If you think yours is as good as mine, I'll put them up. Our jailer has personally driven people to 14 different treatment facilities. I'm not talking about 14 people. I'm talking about 14 different facilities, with the furthest one being probably Genesis East or West, and I believe that's in Hopkinsville. So from far eastern Jenkins or Whitesburg, Kentucky to Hopkinsville, you're probably talking a 6-hour plus drive. In fact, our jailer drove one to treatment this morning. Also, our sheriff's office came on board. They offered a care before cuffs program, which is similar to the Angel Initiative, which is offered through the state police. If someone comes, says that they have a problem with substance use disorder and would like treatment, our sheriff makes sure to try to get them into treatment the same day. And so far, we have gotten people into inpatient treatment the same day they've requested it. Again, this is a picture of our sheriff and jailers working together to drive someone to treatment. Very rare is it that the person arrests you is the person who drives you to treatment, but that's what we have going on here in Letcher County. The program, when I called Addiction Recovery Care and asked for the peer support, which I currently learned what it was called, and some people might call it care navigators, a number of different terms. We were the first ones to do it in Letcher County. Addiction Recovery Care, which is the largest inpatient provider in the state, has taken that model of what we started here in Letcher County, now has that program in 50 counties in the Commonwealth and 1 county in Ohio. This is their numbers, not last year, but a year before that. As you can see from that one chart, they had about 2,700 people into treatment from the community liaison program. That represented about 67% of their entire population. So with that, Addiction Recovery Care was able to get more people who were involved in the court system into treatment than there were people who just simply called voluntarily. I don't have the exact numbers for the next year, but I do know that it went up 60%. And I always like to humble people by telling them that the lady who was addicting herself with the Gatorade probably has in excess of 5,000 people that she's assisted into treatment. These are some photographs, and I will try just to mention the first name of people who we've sent to treatment who've stayed long enough to obtain a year's sobriety and who are ultimately working now in the treatment industry, giving back. This is Jennifer. Obviously, you can see by her condition and her sores that at the time of her arrest at the county jail, she was severely addicted to methamphetamine. She currently works in a treatment facility in Southern Ohio. This is a picture of her fairly recently. This is a picture of her husband, Jason, who was also in addiction. He now works at a treatment facility in Ashland. This is their child together in the change of expression. Kyle came to jail here in Letcher County, stayed in treatment, and I hate to admit it, but Kyle was one of those success stories that took me a long time to figure out because he stayed in treatment. Never heard anything about him until I realized that now he's over 3 or 4 treatment facilities in Louisa. Autumn was in treatment, or she came through the criminal justice system, sent to treatment. She now works in a facility in Knott County. Pam, we sent to treatment, now works for Edgewater and Pikeville. Picture of both Autumn and Pam outside the Letcher County Jail, which I kind of like. Paul, now working for a treatment provider. This gentleman here was our 100th out of 2019. We ultimately sent that year 262 people. And all we could come up with. We were really excited when we hit the 100 mark because events make us excited. We were able to obtain a nice blue piece of paper to write that on, as up everything that we will talk about is 100% non-grant funded. We don't have any money. I'll explain to you how to do that if you want to do it without any money or grants. In essence, 2 words: education and determination. William here was one of the few people that we've sent to treatment. At the time he was in treatment, also his paramour was in treatment who was pregnant. Ultimately, she stayed in treatment long enough to give birth to his son. William here was in jail, fought with the jailers for 15 minutes, all on video. I was going to play it, but I figured we wouldn't have time. He was fighting with the jailers because he was on methamphetamine and cocaine. I realized we had it right with the jail when he asked for treatment. I said, if all 4 jailers agree to you to go to treatment, I'll let you go. Guess what all 4 jailers did? As I always say, it's hard to get 4 people to agree where you're going to eat lunch, let alone to send someone they had fought with 5 rounds of a heavyweight fight. Picture of Jeff. Jeff is the picture I like to refer to as treatment often or most often works on those who you do not expect it to. Picture of here Jeff fairly recently. Again, Allison, you've met Allison. You know the story of her and her baby. One of the best pictures I like as far as sending people to treatment, Allison's meeting here with a lady named Jamie, who had actually no-showed her. Jamie was not in jail, but they did meet in front of the Letcher County Jail. Jamie had no-showed her probably 3-4 times. Allison never gave up on her, and finally, Jamie did show. The picture of Jamie is significant. Jamie is the one who's looking at you, not because she's emaciated or sore-ridden, but to me, her facial expression just looks lost or blank, non-existent. This was in September. This was Jamie by Christmas. So obviously not a full recovery, but anytime you hear people say that short-term treatment facilities don't work, let me know, because I have a ton of pictures to prove it. And when I talk about treatment, because I'm obviously very heavy on the inpatient, you know, again, most of the people that we've dealt with have talked about methamphetamine addiction where there is no medically assisted treatment, which I'm a big fan. If you have an opioid problem, for medically assisted treatment, also to me, the ideal or one of the, you know, there's a big line between inpatient and outpatient, but to me, it's a very complementary line. You know, a lot of times we will send someone to inpatient treatment with the requirements that they follow up with outpatient treatment for the necessary counseling, therapy, or even medically assisted treatment on a case-by-case basis. There should never be a situation that there is a competition between inpatient and outpatient, because we're not competing with each other. We're all competing against addiction. On to my favorite photos, which I maybe shouldn't, but I refer to as my fat baby photos. This is a lady by the name of Angel's Child, who comes in at number 2 with a nice, lovely weight of 8 pounds and 6 ounces. This child was born after about Angel was in treatment for 6 months, gave birth to the child, and she's closing in on her year in sobriety. Another child born into treatment. The William, who I showed you earlier, holding the 100 sign. This is his baby, who wins out at number 1 heaviest baby, 8 pounds and 10 ounces. The lady that I told you also went to treatment, his mother, that's a picture of her, Destiny, there holding the child. That's just a collage they put together. Allison, her baby here from Letcher County, born into treatment. Drug-free in Tanisha baby, who was born into treatment, at treatment and drug-free. So one of the things, and we're kind of, I guess I'm getting close on time. One of the things that I want to talk to you about is in reference to treatment and the pictures that I provided in the importance of the court system working together with behavioral health professionals, this partnership that helps people, that helps us as professionals, is I can be very critical. There's a lot of things out there that looks good, that sounds good, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to prove that you're actually doing good. And that's what this final portion of my presentation is on. I know we're kind of close on time, so I will go quickly. The Center for Disease Control, which we're all more familiar with it now than we ever wanted to be by virtue of COVID-19. Besides keeping track of infectious disease, also keeps track of overall overdose mortality rates. Overall means any drug, and overdose mortality obviously means overdoses that actually resulted in deaths. They look at individuals aged 15 to 64. 15 is to avoid an accidental juvenile overdose, and over 64 would be an elderly person who may have accidentally taken too much medication. They look at these all in 5-year blocks to avoid any form of reporting abnormality. A coroner dies, there's a vacancy in an office, the numbers aren't accurate. So they look at it in 5-year blocks. And looking at the year ending in 2017 for that 5-year period, the CDC noticed something that kind of shocked and amazed them. They noticed that 8 out of the 10 counties in the entire United States of America that had experienced the greatest decline in overall overdose mortality rates were all in Eastern Kentucky. And you can kind of go down through the list and count those. 1, 2, 3, the top 8 out of the 10. Well, you know, that sounds good, but we're talking about over 3,200 counties, boroughs, parishes, or census districts. So out of 3,200 plus counties nationwide, Eastern Kentucky made up the top 8. Also, if you keep going down, you can see other counties, Rockcastle County, and some other Eastern Kentucky counties. And looking at the following year, the 5 years ending in 18, you notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of the top 10 are all in Eastern Kentucky that had experienced the greatest decline in overall overdose mortality rates. You look at the year ending in 19, somewhat similar. 7 or 8 out of the top 10 again, and then still Kentucky well represented with other counties in the top 20 in the nation. So after seeing this data, and let me go through the last year before I go on. The 2020 CDC numbers are not out, even though I call them once a month to ask for it, are not out. These are the numbers that are actually submitted from the state to the CDC. As we're all familiar, there's been spikes in overdose mortality rates throughout Kentucky. Obviously, due to COVID, and the fact a lot would argue that addiction is a disease of isolation, and in a period of time in which you actually have a quarantine and a loss of services, it was somewhat expected. However, there are some counties that actually experienced a decline in overall overdose mortality rates. I'm very proud to say that Letcher County was one of them, and Lawrence County in Eastern Kentucky also experienced a decline even in the COVID years. So based on these findings, the Center for Disease Control hired a company called the National Opinion Research Center. And if you're not familiar with the National Opinion Research Center and you're interested in addiction, you need to be, because they are the preeminent source. Obviously, the CDC hires them. Also, another big client of theirs is the Appalachian Regional Commission. They've been doing this for years. So they hired them to come in and look at and see, well, what's going on with Eastern Kentucky? Why is Eastern Kentucky showing such great numbers? And they came in, and I just gave you one of a 24-page report. There's also some preliminary reports and some summaries that they have that you can access online. If anybody has trouble finding them, please send me an email and I can just send them to you directly. So the National Opinion Research Center comes in, to evaluate. And they do a very intensive study. They partner with the UK Center for Rural Health and Hazard with this. And in their findings, they make two primary points. The decline in overdose mortality rates in Eastern Kentucky is primarily due to, number one, access to treatment. And it's by far, even in other studies, the main factor, getting people into treatment. And number two was community involvement. You know, having people in your community involved, reducing the stigma, showing people who are in recovery what the recovery ecosystem looks like, what things are out there for you. You know, is it housing? Is it transportation? Is it employment? So that is their two findings. So with that, I'm convinced that besides being able to say and show that what we do sounds good and feels good, that it actually does good. Now, there's a whole lot that we've covered. There's a whole lot more that we need to. So if you have any questions, I guess now will be the time for me to try to get back to some type of normal
I think so. George.
presentation mode.
I think that'd be great. I think just let's let people unmute if they wish or enter. We've had some wonderful comments in the chat. Appreciate all of you. So anybody that wants to unmute and make a comment, please feel free.